It's all yours. All right.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name is Chuck Hurst. Call me Chuck. We're going to talk about practical leadership lessons, specifically how to organize for success, the most important job that a leader can do for his organization. So we're going to talk about we're going to address one specific method. We're going to talk about where it came from, specifically the first guy who codified this method. He probably wasn't the first one to use it, but he is the first person that we know of who actually recorded his method and explained why he did things the way he did. So we'll talk about this gentleman named Helmut von Moltke. We'll talk about him, some of the things that he is credited with. Obviously not all of his accomplishments and accreditations, but some of the few important ones, especially the ones that are still relevant to us today. Then we'll spend some time actually going over his method. This is going to involve some audience participation, so I hope everybody's ready. And then why it matters. Okay, so in very brief, Helmut von Moltke was the commander, official title was Chief of Staff of the Prussian Army, and as you can see, he served for about 30 years in the latter half of the 1800s. A little bit on his service record. He was a special advisor to the Turkish army. He tried to assist them with modernizing their organization, their technology. And so he witnessed firsthand what happened when a nation failed to modernize its army. And he took those lessons back to Prussia with him and provided him with a very useful bit of evidence when speaking to Prussian senior leadership as to the consequences of failing to modernize. So that was the first thing that he started doing once he was appointed Chief of Staff, as he began modernizing the equipment of the Prussian army, as well as their training and their organization. Specifically, he made extensive use of staff rides to train his officers. Now, a staff ride is an event where he would get his officers together and they would go and visit a battlefield. And in his case, he liked to visit not only past battlefields, places where battles had been fought, but also places where he anticipated battles happening in the future. So, for instance, if he thought that Prussia needed to worry about Russia invading, he would go to the part of Prussia where he thought most likely a Russian army would attack from. You know, guys, if a Russian army is going to attack, here's where they're going to attack from. He would have all his officers, they would look at the ground, they would look at the surrounding area, and then what he would do is he would actually go around the group and he would say, okay, you, as one of my officers, how would you defend this location? And his particular technique was he would always start with the youngest officer first. And he would go in reverse order, junior to senior. Can anybody tell me why you might want to do that? Good.
So the younger ones don't copy the older ones?
Yes. Why else? So if you're a junior and your senior speaks up, how likely are you to contradict the senior once he's given his idea about what's going to happen? Not very, right? So he would always get the opinion of the most junior guys first so that they would have the opportunity to try it out, see if the senior guys would do it any better. And more than once, the theoretical plans that came out of these staff rides actually formed the basis of what would become the actual Prussian army war plan. So there was a very, very, very practical reason to do this, not just to train his officers, but also to develop good plans for the Prussian army. And then as you can see, these are just some examples of campaigns that he commanded. One in 1864, one in 1866, and then another one in 1870, all of which were successful. And the reason that we talk about, there were a number of smaller actions as well, but the reason that we talk about these specifically is simply to demonstrate that he had a record of success. So he probably knew what he was talking about as far as how to organize his group of people, right? So he is noted for being a disciple of Karl von Clausewitz. If any of you guys remember his name from our strategy classes, Clausewitz was the one who said that war is nothing more than an extension of national policy. You need to have good definable reasons for why it's in your best interest to go to war. And when you go to war, you need to have a good, objective, definable set of criteria that defines victory. Specific objective things that you are trying to accomplish. One of the reasons behind his success. He's credited as being the first of the older generation of military officers to realize just how powerful modern weapons were on the defense. A lot of his peers were still trying to emulate the tactics of Napoleon and Wellington, who are remembered romantically as being commanders who valued maneuver and offense. Although if you actually make a serious study of the Napoleonic Wars, you will quickly realize that that wasn't the case. They still favored defensive siege works as much as anybody else had. But they're remembered for being very dynamic and offensive. And he is credited as being one of the first people who actually codified, no, we need to rewrite our doctrine, redefine what effective command in the field is and how we go about it. And then going along with that, he also developed modern methods of moving the army from point A to point B. Traditionally, you either walked or you rode a horse. He looked at some of the new technology that was developing, specifically railroads, and saw, hey, this could be a great way to move large numbers of men and material from one place to another without wearing them out, so that when they get to the battlefield, they're too tired to fight. And most importantly, he developed the basis of the modern, what we call orders-based system of command, which is used in every successful modern army to this day. Now, this method of orders-based command, different from what had been done in the past. In the past, Napoleon was guys like Napoleon was what you ran into. A guy who said, you are going to go here, you're going to do this. You don't need to know what. Just go and do. Just do what I said. As opposed to using a system of command which relies on, I give you a written order ahead of time that lays out what you have to do, your task, but also explains the purpose, why you are doing this task. This is important because he's acknowledging he's not going to be there in the moment when you have to make a decision. He's acknowledging you're the leader, you're going to be in charge at the flashpoint. You need to be able to make decisions. If you understand why I'm having you do a certain thing, it gives you the freedom to actually make a different decision in the moment. Because if you know what the purpose is, you can say in the moment, well, I know you told me to go left and then right and then straight, but if you want me to achieve this purpose, I actually have to go right, then turn around and walk backwards. And at the end of the day, if I'm in overall command and you have achieved the purpose that I needed you to achieve, that is a win. I don't care that you didn't do what I told you to do. You achieved what I told you to achieve. So that was his approach to command, and that forms the basis of how he organized his officers. He was able to get away with this system of command because he had faith that he had the right people in the right jobs. Now, how was he able to have this level of confidence? He organized his officers based on two criteria, okay? Now it's cut off at the top of the screen there, so you can't see it, but if you can see the bottom here, you'll notice that it says dumb. So what's the other end of the spectrum?
Smart.
Thank you. And as you can see here on the horizontal, he's got lazy and hardworking. Now, just to set the stage a little bit and clarify what these terms actually mean, because words mean things. Smart, in this case, describes whatever intelligence I need you to have. It can be street smart, it can be book smart, it can simply be going along with street smart, just basic levels of common sense, understanding the differences in you have 3 tasks to accomplish, how to prioritize them, whatever it may be. The dumb person is the exact opposite. The dumb person has no understanding of what they're doing or why. And you could almost consider it willful ignorance at this point. So that explains the vertical. And then for the horizontal, a lazy person, under his definition, this is not somebody who's unable to work hard, they just prefer not to, if that makes sense. This is somebody who's okay with having sitting around time. They don't mind. Versus hardworking, on this end of the spectrum, this is the type of person who always has to be doing something, right? If they don't have something to do, they'll go find something to do. Not necessarily a bad quality, something that you need from time to time, but you have to understand which people are what and where they fall. So he would evaluate people based on how lazy or hardworking they were. His specific words were lazy and diligent. And then he would evaluate people on how smart or dumb they were. And he would break them down into 4 categories. So starting over here with the smart but lazy people, who do you think falls into this category? Yes, Jesse. Oh, okay.
Commanders.
Say it again?
Commanders.
Commanders, leaders. Yes. Why?
Delegate.
You're efficient.
It's like you guys have seen my slides before. It's like I've shown this to some of you. Yes. Your leaders, you need people who are naturally inclined to delegate and are going to look for the most efficient way to accomplish a task. Now, why is this, do you think? Why is delegation, why is that an important skill for a leader?
They have more on their plate than an individual because they're overseeing others.
Exactly. So you're responsible for more than one thing. So Jesse, if you as a leader, if your approach is to get down in the trenches and shovel dirt all the time and try to do all the work yourself, will any of that work get done? No. You have people for that. The great thing about being the leader is you can always say that you've got somebody for that. You don't have to do it yourself. And usually the people that you have for that are better at it than you are because it's their job. What about efficiency? Why is that important?
Reduces the cost.
Yeah, exactly. And why do you need to reduce costs? Because there's always going to be another task. There's always going to be something else to spend your resources on, and the more resources you have, the more things you can accomplish, right? What about this last one? Organizational recovery. Remember, these are guys who are okay with having sitting around time. So if I'm okay with sitting around, am I okay with my organization resting and recovering from an intense task? Now, tell me why this is important. Why is it important to let your organization recover? Say it again.
Burnout.
Burnout? Exactly. You burn your organization out, you can't do anything. Period. And in some cases, the consequences can be a lot worse. And we'll talk about that more in a second. So let's go over here to the smart and hardworking category. Who goes here? Is this a useful category for your organization? Yes. So who goes here?
Individual contributors.
Say that again?
Individual contributors.
Yes. So planners and support staff. Now, what do individual contributors, and the name's in the title?
They do things. They accomplish tasks.
Yes.
But they may not be self-directed. They may not know what task to do.
Possibly. Typically, these are the things that you focus on with your individual contributors. They need to be working at all times, so you put them into a role where there is always more work to do. So in the United States Army, we would label these guys staff officers, okay? So you have your personnel officer, your intelligence officer, your operations officer, your logistics officer, your communications officer, right? All of those things are extremely necessary to the smooth and efficient running of your organization, and there is always more to do. For your operations officer, there are always operations to coordinate and plan. For your intelligence officer, there's always intelligence to gather and analyze. For your personnel officer, there are always people coming in, going. You need to keep track of it. Disciplinary actions that you need to keep track of. Your logistics officer, are the trucks working? In the case of the military, do you have enough computers, right? Are all the computers working? How many of your computers have been infected with ransomware, right? Things you got to know, things you have to keep track of. You guys remember all the way back to your Sun Tzu, what does he say? specifically about what you need to know.
Know your enemy and know yourself.
Say it louder.
Know your enemy and know yourself.
So how do you know yourself? You don't know how many computers you have in your organization. You don't know how many computers have been infected by ransomware. It's important things to know, right? Because it'll affect your bottom line. Those are the kinds of jobs that these guys do because there's always more to be done, right? Because they always need to be working, this is how you spend most of your time managing. These are guys who need to be told when to go and rest. This is the guy who needs to be told, hey man, you've been here for 24 hours. Go home and take a shower, get some sleep. Come back when you've had a cup of coffee, that kind of thing. Because they will work themselves to death. I have actually seen this happen. When I was deployed, one of our units had, the commander made a certain decision and took most of the important support staff forward into Iraq with him to see where they were going to be operating. They left one guy behind to do all of those important jobs: coordinate personnel, analyze intelligence, oversee operations, oversee logistics, oversee communications. How long do you think that guy lasted? 2 days. 2.5 days. He didn't show up for a decision briefing, so people went to find him. They looked in the room of his, they looked in the window of his room, and they saw a pair of feet sticking up on the bunk. And they kicked down his door because they thought he was dead. He wasn't. He was okay. But he was exhausted because he had been going for 2.5 days on nothing but Rippets and cigarettes. No food, no sleep, no nothing. And he got to a point where his body just shut down. So very important. You have to let people recover. And these people, especially, they bring incredible value to your organization, but you have to watch them. As opposed to these guys who, while you can generally trust them to work on their own, you do need to make sure they're gainfully employed. Now, before we move on, one thing to note about both of these categories. What's the common thread? They're all intelligent. Thank you, Jen. So what does that mean about both of these groups? Do you need to spend a great majority of your time watching them, looking over their shoulder? No. You can trust them because they're smart, right? So you can trust that their work will be good. You can trust that these guys are doing what they need to be doing. You can trust that even if these guys are working on something you didn't tell them to work on because they're smart, you can trust that it's good, right? Is everybody with me so far? Okay. Now, for the fun stuff. Lazy and dumb. What do we do with these guys? Do we do anything with these guys? Say it again, Chris. Do we fire them? Maybe. We would say these are useful idiots. Why? Why would these guys be useful? Because remember, just because they're lazy doesn't mean they can't work hard. They just prefer not to.
Strong like ox.
Yes. What were you going to say?
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You give them jobs like digging holes in the trenches and lugging stuff around because they will find a more efficient way to do it, and they don't need to be given challenging tasks.
Yes. As long as you give them specific instructions, again, because they're dumb, but as long as you give them specific instructions, you can trust that they'll do what needs to be done. Are digging holes and digging trenches, that kind of work, is that necessary?
Yeah.
There's always heavy lifting type tasks that don't require a lot of brain power, but somebody's got to do it. Now, why is it useful that they're lazy? They won't wear out. What else is likely to happen when I give these guys a specific task and then they finish it? What are they likely to do?
Recover.
Nothing.
Recover.
Yes. Why is that useful to me if I'm in charge of this whole thing? Maybe.
So they'll be ready to do the next task and you do it home.
Bang. Say it again, Joe.
Because they'll be ready to do the next task when you give it to them.
They will wait for further orders. They'll do exactly what they're told, no more, no less. But because I need to give them specific instruction, I'm going to spend most of my time managing these guys. Because I need to give them very specific, detailed, step-by-step instructions. Like some of us with our early labs, where we needed step-by-step walkthroughs of how to install virtual machines. Now, moving on. Dumb, but hardworking. Really, these guys are valuable because they're hardworking, right? What do you guys think?
They're dangerous.
Why are they dangerous?
Because they don't know what to do, but they need to be doing something, so they'll find something to do, even if it's costly.
Bingo. So you need to get rid of these guys. Exactly what she said. They need to be working at all times, and they need constant supervision, but because they're dumb, their work is not good. And more than likely, their hard work will need to be fixed by either of these guys, or gals, or groups, however you want to phrase it. And what does that do to these guys? Well, they're already working hard, right? Now I'm giving them even more. So what does that do to their ability to recover? Exactly. These guys are probably the ones who are going to wind up having to clean up the mess. But what's that going to do to them and their ability to let their own organizations recover? So, what's the point of it all? What does this have in common? Like, what do all of these things have in common with each other? Why does it matter? What have we just done by evaluating our people in this way?
Kind of like a SWOT analysis, identifying.
Exactly. We've gone through and we evaluated the strengths and weaknesses of our people, the natural strengths and weaknesses of each of these people. And then what have we done? Right. So we looked at their strengths and weaknesses and we assigned them a role accordingly. So what does that mean for your organization? Why?
Sustainable.
People in the right places.
Say it again.
You have people in the right places.
Exactly. You have the right people in the right places. So that enables you, as the overall commander, to delegate, right? And trust that your organization will do what it needs to do in your absence. And when you look at successful organizations versus unsuccessful organizations, one of the things that tends to emerge, especially in organizations that are consistently successful over the long term, is that those organizations are organized in such a way that they can function for a little while, at least, without that senior executive leader. That guy can afford to get sick. He can afford to take a break. And things will keep rolling even in his absence, right? Going back to our early examples of Napoleon versus Wellington, Napoleon ultimately failed because he was a micromanager. He told people, here's what you do. You don't need to know why. When Napoleon was in a situation where he could see the entire field and he had a small enough force that he was able to command and control it himself directly, he was very successful. But as soon as armies started to get bigger and he had to rely on multiple redundant layers of subordinates to communicate his orders, it all fell apart. And that was why he lost, is because he could not rely on his people because the ones he had promoted were all a bunch of yes men who just did what they were told and didn't think about it. So that's all I have. Any questions?